so good that sophisticated disguises can be made and applied in less than a minute. In 1990, once the Berlin Wall was down and the great game was over, Mr. Mendez took the escape route. The master of disguise now spends his days on his 40 acres in the Blue Ridge, painting from life, far from the world of illusion and deception, unquote, from the New York Times. So in the 50s and 60s, Mr. Mendez of the CIA was in charge of creating counterfeit people. The 50s and 60s were the very time period that the Lee Harvey Oswald was created. From that time on, I started concentrating on the mystery of too many Oswalds. I conducted many studies of ID photos of Oswald and incorporated them into my JFK slide presentation called The Framing of Lee Harvey Oswald. Because of many requests from researchers interested in this material, I eventually put some of my study on videotape, The Many Faces of Lee Harvey Oswald. In studying the many photos of Oswald for my slide presentation and video, I noticed that not all the Oswald photos look like the person alleged to be the assassin. I noticed that some had a different shaped head than others. The egg-shaped Oswald head of the passport photo on the left is obviously different from the Dallas police mugshot. The human adult skull does not change size and shape like you see here. Anyone with a ruler and the ability to balance an algebraic equation can prove easily that these are photos of two different persons. For instance, let A equal the passport photo and let B equal the Dallas mugshot. Let W equal width and H equal height. In these comparable frontal views, I have printed the photos to exactly the same distance between eye pupils. Thus, an equation for comparing the photos would be AW is to BW as AH is to BH. You do not even need a pencil to work this equation. Just project and measure this slide image as I did. I measured the height and width of each head and substituted the numbers for the letters, and here's what I got. 13 is to 13 as 21 and a half is to 20. Obviously, the equation is not balanced. The skulls cannot be the same. On this basis alone, two Oswalds can be proved. Let me repeat. On the basis of these two photos alone, two different Oswalds can be proved. In my study of the Oswald photos, I also noticed that many of the photos seem to be fakes or composites. Some composed of halves of two faces spliced together. In some, he seemed to have the Oswald face but somebody else's chin. On the backyard photos, he had told Captain Fritz that this was a fake photo with his face on somebody else's body. In some of the photos, I noticed Oswald seemed to have a sharply pointed chin with a cleft, but in others he had a broad square chin. In other photos, I noticed that he had a thick bull-like neck, but in others, a skinny, scrawny neck. Oswald hairstyles varied from straight and thin to thick and curly, and his hairline shifted radically from month to month. Sometimes his nose was sharply pointed, sometimes it was broad and flat, and one photo even shows a nose with a bulbous tip. Look at this sharply pointed nose of Oswald in Russia. Oswald in the Marines was photographed many different ways. Here he has a fat face, square chin, and bull-like neck. In this photo, he seems to have a 13-inch head. When asked about these two Marine Oswald photos in Life magazine by Jenner, his brother John Pick answered, quote, "No, sir, I don't recognize them. The lower one appears to me to look like Robert rather than Lee. The upper one, unless they tell me that, I would never guess that would be Lee, sir," unquote. Pick, when asked whether he recognized the photo of Oswald handing out fair play for Cuba leaflets. Pick said, unquote, Pick said, quote, "No, sir, I would be unable to recognize him, sir," unquote. In further testimony by John Pick, he responded to the following question regarding Oswald on his return from Russia. "You noticed a material change in his physical appearance?" Pick replied, quote, "Yes, he was much thinner, didn't have as much hair, his face features were different, his eyes set back. I had remembered that his face was rounder, that he had a bull neck. I looked for this. I didn't notice this at all," unquote. Are these the observations we would expect from their others? The most significant Pick testimony about his brother concerns this Bronx Zoo photo, when he said, quote, "Sir, from that picture, I could not recognize that is Lee Harvey Oswald," unquote. I find this amazing. Pick could not recognize a photo of his brother taken at a time when Lee had been living with him in New York. John Armstrong's excellent research, which you will see later tonight, shows that this photo is probably the first time we see Harvey, the new Oswald. The chronology of many photos puts different-looking Oswalds at different places at the same time. For instance, the bottom two photos here show an Oswald in Texas and an Oswald in the Philippines at the same time, and they look nothing alike. We are asked to believe that these two Marines are the same person, one at the time of his defection and one just a few months earlier. At the time of the defection, the media obtained from an unidentified source a photo of the defector which was distributed worldwide. Here it appeared on the front page of the Fort Worth Press. This same picture, after the assassination, appeared in several obviously altered forms. This grouping shows four plainly different versions of that same photo, which is allegedly a snapshot taken in Moscow. I have proved that it is actually a composite photo. Here, in similar caps, we have an Oswald with a very thin neck and another with a very thick neck. In this slide, the Marine Oswald on the left has a pug nose, thick neck, and fat face. Amazingly, however, another Marine photo of Oswald shows him with a very thin face and neck and a long, thin nose. And sometimes even prints of the same pose looks strangely different, as if modified to be narrower, with large features squeezed close together. About 1990, my video attracted the attention of John Armstrong, who had an avid interest in the JFK case, but was not a well-known JFK researcher. He was intrigued by my idea of multiple Oswalds, and was surprised that nobody had really investigated the identity of Oswald in depth. So he decided to make Lee Harvey Oswald his area of intensive study, and now probably knows more about Oswald than anyone. From my vantage point, John is doing by far the most productive research today, an area that has never been researched. John suggested that I round up all possible photos of Oswald and make them into a chronological poster of Oswald faces. I did, with 77 photos, and you may be familiar with the resulting poster, which I titled The Evolution of Lee Harvey Oswald. The visual effect resulting from John's suggestion helped make obvious the case for multiple Oswalds. I had become convinced that two Oswalds had been created as part of a false defector program to Russia. The false defector program required intelligence training, language fluency, a plausible defection story, and plausible deniability. John's excellent research is persuasive that I had been correct in my theory that there were too many Oswalds, that a second Oswald probably had been created by an intelligence agency using the identity of the original Lee Harvey Oswald to attain credible criteria for a false defector. Following my slideshow and after you eat, John will present very convincing evidence that two Oswalds were connected first to a covert U.S. intelligence operation and later to the Kennedy assassination. Based on ample evidence he has found, and for ease of reference, John refers to these two Oswalds as Lee and Harvey. Although the creation in 1953 of the two Oswalds had nothing to do with the assassination, I think there is no doubt from the documentation discovered by John that both of these Oswalds were somehow used in the assassination plot by their intelligence handlers. But there is great doubt that either of them fired at the motorcade on November 22nd. My brief slideshow will set the stage for John's presentation about two Oswalds, two covertly controlled government agents, both using the name and identity of Lee Harvey Oswald, were somehow involved in the JFK assassination. Reason enough for a 34-year cover-up. Remember, in a 1964 newspaper interview, Marina said cryptically, quote, "I had two husbands, Lee, the father of my children, an affectionate and kind man, and Harvey Oswald, the assassin of President Kennedy," unquote. John will also show convincing evidence that there were two Marguerite Oswalds, a mother for Lee and a different mother for Harvey. John located many photos alleged to be Marguerite, and they seem to show two different people. One of them was Charlotte, Marguerite everyone is familiar with, the one who looked like this when I visited her house in the 1970s at her invitation. I would guess that she's about 5'2". The other one was tall, the Marguerite who was married to Edwin Ekdahl. Let's look at three Marguerite photo height comparisons. Here she is next to husband Ekdahl in front of the family car in the 1940s. Son John Peck, in his testimony, described Ekdahl as being over 6 feet tall. How tall is Marguerite? You can see that I've marked this off in feet for your convenience. In this photo, Marguerite seems to be nearly as tall as husband Ekdahl. John tracked down and interviewed many former friends and associates of Marguerite. From the manager of Paul's shoe store in Fort Worth, he obtained this 1957 photo of Marguerite. He obtained the Paul's shoe store photo from the man standing behind Marguerite. He is over 6 feet tall. How tall is Marguerite? But most photos show a familiar and shorter Marguerite. Standing before the Oswald casket are Marina, Robert, and Marguerite. Marina is about 5'2". How tall is Marguerite? Facial comparisons also seem to show two different women in the same year, 1957, in different cities, New Orleans and Fort Worth. Can these two photos be photos of the same woman? John will also show evidence that our government knew of the multiple Oswalds and multiple Marguerites, and authorities apparently fabricated and destroyed evidence to hide these intelligence ties. John will concentrate entirely on Harvey and Lee, and will help you separate these two individuals and understand their roles in the assassination. Apparently both were involved in some way. What I'm showing you will preview and help you understand what John will be showing you later. And I want you to know that I agree with everything that he says. However, I may go a little further than John and talk about a few additional things not covered in his presentation, such as I've already shown you comparisons of many disparate Oswald photos, and will show you some more. Number two, how many Oswalds were there? My answer is thought-provoking. 3, faked photos showing Oswald. You will wonder why there are many fake photos of Oswald, who faked them and why. Number 4, was Oswald merely a generic intelligence name loaned to an intelligence agency by his mother and then used as needed by many different individuals? And number 5, are any of the Oswalds still alive? You can form your own opinion. Here is a grouping of alleged Oswalds, alleged photos of Lee Harvey Oswald, which to me seem to be unlike the Oswald who was blamed for the assassination and later killed by Jack Ruby. It is hard for me to believe that these three Marines can be the same person. Many other photos seem not to depict the Oswald we know. For instance, this husky, ruddy-faced Oswald in Gardner, or this fat-faced Marine Oswald, or this highly retouched, fat-faced Oswald in Russia. Were there more than two Oswalds? Information from the Russian period seems to indicate that unlikely possibilities to me. Not all photos from the Russian era look like the Dallas Oswald. In some photos, he has a long curly hair and a pointed chin. Look at the long curly hair in this photo with Marina on their apartment balcony. In some, he has a fat face and a round chin. In some, he has a square chin and straight hair. And there are many peculiar photos which I think show guys who do not even resemble Oswald. And there's the matter of height. In many of the photos, we have a very short Oswald, just barely taller than Marina, who's 5'2", and he bears little resemblance to the Oswald that we know. Not widely known is a newspaper interview given in 1995 by Anna Zeiger, a friend of Lee and Marina in Minsk. Anna, her mother, sister, and Lee are seen here fishing. She says of Lee, quote, "He wasn't tall. He measured 5'2" or 5'3", no more," unquote. This photo seems to verify that the Oswald the Zeigers knew was extremely short. All three photos have been faked for some reason, possibly to substitute a different Oswald. This photo shows Mrs. Zeiger apparently looking over Marina's shoulder at baby June. But I can prove that this photo and two others in the series are fabrications. Here, for instance, Mrs. Zeiger has been pasted much too close to Marina, and Marina casts no shadow on her, as indicated by the red arrow. The edge of the photos shows some tiny sprocket holes of some rare-type camera unknown to me. It is very obviously a crude composite fabrication, and it has a different aspect ratio than the other two, and it does not have the sprocket holes available. I wrote two detailed articles regarding this fakery for the fourth decade, listing all the anomalies which I had detected. An obvious sign of one picture pasted atop another is the faint white glow around the edge of Oswald's leg. To a graphic artist like me, this is a sign of light reflection from the white cut edge of a photo which has been pasted atop another picture without blackening and sandpapering the edges to prevent this effect. Does everyone see the white glow? And this slide shows a bottom left corner which has just been blacked in for no apparent reason. And this photo, which has double edge representing a snapshot print, actually shows two edges of the image where different photos were pasted together. This is obviously a photocopied print of a pasted together composite, not a true snapshot from an original camera negative. We already know that there are many other composite photos of Lee Harvey Oswald, so perhaps the mysterious data log composites are part of the same intelligence operation. So what can we conclude from strange Russian photos and photo tampering? I think that it raises a distinct possibility of more Oswalds than the two which John will tell you about. In Russia, if there was a short Oswald, if there were different looking Oswalds, if Oswald was substituted in fake photos, then we have to consider the question as yet unanswered. Were there more than two Oswalds? Of course, we know that many other fake photos are sprinkled throughout the case, from the Moscow and Minsk defection photos to all three backyard photos. The question is, why would there be so many fabrications fabricated photos of Lee Oswald if he was just an ordinary citizen? Another significant question is whether the name Lee Harvey Oswald was simply used as a generic identity for many agents. John will present persuasive evidence that even while Oswald officially was in Russia, other agents back in the States seem to have been using the name also. One example is this Department of Defense card at the bottom, which was in the possession of Agent Richard Casnagel. And we all know about the alleged Oswald that the CIA photographed in Mexico City. Could the CIA have been mistaken, or is this guy really using the Oswald name? The Oswald name is used with many variations, such as Harvey Lee Oswald, Lee Henry Oswald, O.H. Lee, L.H. Oswald, and others. John's presentation will give you a new perspective on these and many more multiple Oswald sightings. The question of imposture was raised in the 1980s by the late author Michael Edis to such an extent that the body of the man killed by Ruby was eventually exhumed. I have recommended to the ARRB that they be sure to obtain all photos, films, videos, notes, and reports of the Lyndon Norton exhumation team. I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of two of the Norton team's official exhumation photos, which were published in the Norton Report. Here we see the upper teeth of the exhumed skull. In the exhumation photo, all the front teeth were intact, you noticed. But at least 3 different photos, like this one, plus several witnesses support the story that Oswald had an upper front tooth knocked out in junior high school in New Orleans. The Norton exhumation team identified Oswald's skull by using dental x-rays furnished by the government. The x-rays were said to have been taken on 3/27/58 at El Toro Marine Base in California, according to Oswald's Marine Corps medical records. The only trouble with this is that officially Oswald was in the Philippines on 3/27/58. Is this proof of 2 Oswalds? Many medical records indicate that Lee Oswald had a very prominent mastodectomy scar behind his left ear from an operation at age 6. But no photos of the Dallas Oswald show such a scar. Here's a quick look at the Norton team's photo of the exhumed skull. This skull photo further clouds the mastodectomy issue. The left side of the skull shows a jagged gouge in the mastoid bone, but doctors who have viewed this photo tell me that over a period of 18 years, the bone should have healed over smoothly and solidly, and would never show a ragged bone defect such as seen in the photo. Another issue which this photo raises is whether the body in the grave had Dr. Rose's autopsy craniotomy sulci to remove the brain. No cut is visible in the photo. Doctors who have viewed this picture tell me it is unlikely that the loose skull cap bone would have reattached itself this solidly, so that it would not separate during handling, which allegedly included the skull being accidentally dropped to the floor.
On top of all of this, in 1978, the House Select Committee established that the CIA had a 201 personnel file on Lee Oswald. Agency officials tried to convince the committee that this file, and the fact that they'd kept its existence secret for 15 years, was nothing unusual, and did not prove that Oswald had worked for the CIA. However, nearly a half-dozen former CIA employees told various researchers that the mere existence of a 201 file on Oswald proved he had worked for the agency. All of the preceding information, plus much more, leaves little doubt that Lee Harvey Oswald, far from being the solitary assassin as stated by the Warren Commission, was a man surrounded by traces of intelligence work.
Wow, thanks a lot, Dan. This is going to give us a lot of food for thought. You know, this information wasn't available to us back in the 60s. Now, Jack White, do you agree with this assessment that Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in some sort of intelligence work?
Yes, Craig, I do. And furthermore, I'd like to show you some of my graphic studies, which have convinced me that when it comes to a study of Lee Harvey Oswald, we are dealing with more than one person. Here are what I call the many faces of Lee Harvey Oswald. The first one on the upper left here is the photograph made of Oswald standing in front of an inch chart taken at the time he joined the Marine Corps in 1956. A couple of years later, when Oswald left the Marine Corps, he had this passport photograph made, and he used it on his passport to go to Russia. Within a month, he arrived in Russia, and this photograph was made of him. It's called the Moscow photo. The fourth picture is the Minsk photo taken at a time that Lee and Marina lived in Minsk. All four photographs on the bottom are of the man who was killed by Jack Ruby in Dallas. This photo here was on Oswald's second passport taken in New Orleans in June. This is the August arrest picture of Oswald made by the New Orleans police when he was arrested for handing out fair play for Cuba handbills. This picture was made in a photo booth and was used by Oswald in Mexico City to apply for a visa to go to Cuba. And the last picture here, of course, is the Dallas police mugshot of Oswald taken November 22nd. Once we look closely, we begin to see that all of these pictures may not be of the same person.
The first thing I noticed about this Marine photo, aside from the fact that it appears to be some sort of bad photocopy, is that Oswald here has a 13-inch long head, a physical impossibility. I double-checked by placing a man who is the same size as Oswald against a wall height chart just like Oswald, and you can see that the proportions of the Oswald photo are all wrong. There is something very wrong with this photo, and it is not because Oswald was standing away from the height chart, since both he and the wall chart are in focus at the same time. This passport photo and this Moscow photo allegedly were made only a few weeks apart, yet they look like totally different persons. The Moscow photo of Oswald is the only one printed full page size in the Warren Commission volumes, and it too is full of problems. Notice that while one half of his face is in deep shadow, indicating a light source from the upper left, the shadow of his body falls to his right. His right shoulder is broad and square, while his left is thin and sloping. We can see traces of retouching on his lips, eyebrow, and hairline. Someone has worked extensively with this photo, but why? I then noticed a notch in his hairline and a fat lower lip on the right. When I connected these points, I discovered that this photo of Oswald suddenly seemed to be a composite photo of two separate people. Then, when I straightened his head by leveling his eyes, you can see that his right ear and eyebrow are much too low. Clearly, this is not a genuine photograph. I then studied this photo, reportedly taken of Oswald while he was living in Minsk, and I discovered that this one too has evidence of retouching and also a notch in the chin area. When this photo is split, we again seem to see two separate individuals. I suspected that someone had made another composite photo of two different men to make it appear to be Lee Oswald. I proved this to myself by a simple procedure I call split-face composites. Here is Oswald's Dallas police mugshot. There is no question that this is a photograph of one man, the man in custody in Dallas. This is a split-face composite with the right side of Oswald's face being flopped, produced one face made up of the same side. The same was done to the left side. As you can see, there are slight differences since no one's face is perfectly symmetrical. However, it is obviously the face of the same person, and the faces are from the same photograph. When I produced a split-face composite of the Moscow photo, I found that the two faces did not even look human. Obviously, the faces of the two men in this photo could not be made to match each other. Yet in the Minsk photo, when I made a split-face composite, I was amazed to see two separate men's faces. The man on the right seems to be Lee Harvey Oswald, we saw in the newsreels from Dallas, while the man on the left appears only vaguely similar, more like the Marine Oswald.
Based on my studies, I have concluded that the Oswald in Dallas was probably the same man who returned from Russia, but in all likelihood was not the same Oswald who joined the Marines. Somewhere between joining the Marines and arriving in Russia, a substitution was made.
But Jack, don't you think his wife Marina would know the difference?
No, Craig, because she married Oswald after the switch. The man she married is the man that returned to the United States and was arrested in Dallas after the assassination. This is the only Oswald she ever knew.
Well, Jack, you really have me confused now. You mean to tell me that somebody was posing as Lee Harvey Oswald even before the assassination?
Yes, Craig, that's right. Let's say that a man of Russian origin, trained as a spy, used the identity of Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged Marine defector. He is the one who sailed for Europe from New Orleans.
Jack, you have to admit, this is rather a bizarre allegation. Now, is there any other evidence other than your graphic studies that indicate that such a substitution did occur?
Yes, there is. For example, we now know that on June 3rd, 1960, 3 years before the assassination, none other than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover himself sent this message to the security office of the State Department, warning of the possibility that an imposter was using Oswald's birth certificate.
You mean to tell us that J. Edgar Hoover was personally aware of Lee Harvey Oswald 3 years before the assassination?
Yes, exactly. And you remember that after the assassination, we were told that no one in the government knew much about Oswald or had paid any attention to him.
That's true, Jack. Well, this case is taking more turns than a mountain road.